Okay, so in this video we're just going to talk about traffic calming measures, so things like sleeping policemen or speed bumps, narrowing the road, interactive sort of speed signs, and speed limits. Okay, so what is the purpose of these things? Well, obviously the national speed limit is 60 miles an hour, but if you drive at 60 miles an hour in an urban area like this where you might have more people around, people crossing the road, then you're more likely to have a crash, because the faster you're going, the more difficult it is to stop. The longer it takes to stop, the more likely you are to collide with somebody, injure them, and potentially kill them. Okay, unfortunately. So how are we going to make sure or reduce the chances of such a fatality or such a collision? The way that we can do that is just by reducing the speed. So, for example, if your speed is half what it was to begin with, then your thinking distance will be half. Okay, and your braking distance will be a quarter of what it was. Okay, so when the speed is half what it was, your thinking distance is half what it was, and your braking distance will be a quarter of what it was. So when we halve the speed, we drastically reduce the stopping distance, which means it's much less likely that we'll have a crash or a collision with a pedestrian. So the way in which we make people reduce their speed is obviously by having speed limits, 50 miles an hour, down from 60 when you come into Cardiff along Manor Way, for example, 30 miles an hour usually in urban areas, 20 miles an hour perhaps outside a school. Okay, and that again means that we're going to be able to stop in a much shorter distance, and we're much less likely to have a collision with a pedestrian if they step out in front of us. So all of these things, speed bumps, they're designed to make you go more slowly, because you have to slow down before going over them, otherwise it might damage your car, or it's rather unpleasant in terms of bouncing over it. Narrowing the road, that means that certain people certain direction gets priority, but in the other direction you have to stop to let them through, and that tends to slow cars down. Okay, so again, reduces the chance of a collision. You might see that alongside the Roath Park Lake. I can't remember whether it's Lake Road. Actually, I think it's called, I can't remember the name of the road now, but opposite Ninian Road, the other side of the Roath Park Wreck there, I think you see such things down there. And then you've got these interactive speed signs. So as you drive towards them, they will flash up your speed in green if you're below the speed limit, and in red if you're above it. They're powered by solar panels, and that's to try and encourage you to slow down. We haven't mentioned here also we have speed cameras, and they obviously encourage people to slow down, because if you go too fast you are going to get a penalty notice and a fine, and potentially some you have to go on a driver safety course as well, I think. So all of these things are to reduce the speed, and if you're asked about this in an exam, the key thing to try and say is the whole point of these is to reduce your speed, and if you halve your speed, the thinking distance halves, the braking distance quarters. Make sure you mention those actual relationships there. The other thing to be aware of is if you do have a collision, the risk of fatality varies according to the impact speed. Now this data here, this bold curve here, not the dotted lines, but the bold curve here, is data from a study done by Ashton and McKay. Now, there are other studies have been done which actually disagree with this study quite wildly. So there's lots of data out there in terms of the relationship between impact speed and pedestrian fatality, and it's not really very similar. It's all quite varied. So you've got to be aware of that. But according to this study here, for an impact speed of 30 miles an hour, your risk of fatality is 10%. At 40 miles an hour, the risk will be 5 times that, 50%. Okay, so a huge difference. 10 miles an hour, difference in speed, massive difference in the chance of fatality. So obviously if we encourage people to drive more slowly, not only are they less likely to have a collision because they're more likely to stop in time, but they'll also likely, if they do have an impact, it'll be less severe. Okay. Now, I would say that other studies have said that at 30 miles an hour, the risk of fatality is around 50%. But obviously, the lower the speed, the less the risk of fatality. Okay, so there we go.